Dear listener, before the story begins, I ask you to subscribe to my channel. This is the best motivation at the start. And we are starting. Salutations to all who are tuning in to hear my tale. I never imagined that I would one day be among those who share their life stories here, where I once simply relished listening to narratives and being astonished. Nevertheless, where should I commence? Well, perhaps in sequence. I'm 29 years old, have been married for 6 years, and have a cherished son who will soon reach the age of 5. Throughout my adolescence, starting at the age of 11, I was deeply engaged in sports, which consumed my entire focus. At 23, I had to abandon sports due to various circumstances. Then came my first bout of depression and life changes, ending my relationship with my girlfriend, which I initiated myself, as we had entirely different perspectives on life. I foolishly dropped out of college. To cope with the depression, I began drinking for the first time in my life, socializing on weekends with friends, old sports buddies, and new acquaintances. I overcame that depression thanks to a new, intense passion and goal: music and my future wife, whom I encountered at one of those gatherings. At that time, she was 20 and I was 23. She started showing signs of interest, gazing at me, and this continued for half a year. We occasionally met, conversed, and exchanged messages. On my end, I treated her rather poorly, toying with her and her emotions, despite seeing the utmost care and support from her in every aspect. After 6 months of knowing each other, we had our first intimate encounter, after which I provided no specifics about our relationship. We slept together, and that was it. Against this backdrop, we had arguments and uncertainty. Plus, I was foolish enough to start communicating with my ex, which my future wife discovered. After a couple of months, I began to realize that I was drawn to her and couldn't be without her anymore. I started getting envious of every post, everyone who flirted with her, and I began to make up for lost time. I proposed that we date, which made her ecstatic. We started cohabiting, initially renting an apartment. Everything was magnificent then. Love, a tidy home, care, affection. She always greeted me after work with dinner, and we frolicked almost every day. In short, it was perfect. After some time, I took the initiative for marriage myself, proposed, and she accepted. We got married. A year and a half after the wedding, we had a delightful son, whom we named as I suggested. The first changes began 3 months after our son's birth. She became anxious, but I assumed it was undoubtedly hormones and all that. The first conflicts also arose against the backdrop of nerves and my issues at work. By the way, I have been working as an industrial rescuer for a long time, and my wife is a nurse. I reassured her, saying that we would overcome it all, since I myself desired the unity of the family. We temporarily moved in with my mother-in-law, and that's when even greater changes began. A couple of times I overheard my mother-in-law quietly turning my wife against me, saying what a jerk I'd become, earning little, being nervous. My wife apparently succumbed to these conversations a great deal, because later, when we moved into an apartment that I inherited from my parents, which also struck my male pride, my wife gradually began not to care about anything. The house became cluttered, she stopped taking care of herself, and our intimacy became less frequent and hurried. While our son was sleeping, she began to take on additional work. She would return from her side jobs even more peculiar and aloof. Later, I discovered that her nurse friends were getting into her head, saying, "What kind of man do you have? Some musician and former athlete. He's definitely cheating on you and doesn't love you. Leave him." I saw her friends once, 20 or more years older than her, divorced, unhappy in life. They also started to get her drunk. We continued with this routinely moderate life for what seemed like 2 years. We both knew that we couldn't do without each other in any way. We raised our son, made plans for the future. Quarrels, work, rest, home. I, as a husband, relaxed, thinking that's it. I finally won the woman over. She's mine, and there's nothing to worry about. However, a year ago, my wife's mother, my mother-in-law, passed away from cancer, after which my wife withdrew into herself even more. She was deeply concerned, walked around not herself, in a daze past me, and started hitting the bottle. She abruptly started smoking. I supported her to the best of my ability, God knows, but I understood that there were still stones of resentment from my wife's side for the fact that during her mother's life, she and I were, to put it mildly, far from friends. 6 months after her passing, everything appeared to settle down. My wife seemed calmer, but it seemed to me that some psychological changes had still taken place within her. And then, in the summer of 2019, my wife secured a new position at a cutting-edge, advanced medical center with numerous non-resident elite male doctors and specialists. All that summer, I was extremely occupied with work and other matters, career advancement and other things. We were both immersed in work up to our necks, leaving very little personal time, only on weekends, but we managed to relax and unwind together with our son. Our intimacy became very mediocre. I don't even recall when we last greeted each other from work with welcome kisses. We started to argue over everyday life. She completely stopped paying attention to housekeeping, meaning the house was a mess, and she ceased spending time with and caring for our son. And finally, at the end of August, we had a major dispute. September arrived, and I began to feel that my wife and I were already like strangers. You know, everything connecting us had vanished. The only thing left was our son. She started to disappear at work for weeks at a time and suddenly began to take care of herself with renewed vigor. New clothes, new underwear. At the same time, she began to get completely drunk on the rare weekends, to the point of what is called wasted. She started password protecting all her gadgets, hiding her phone, stopped going on social media from the computer, and simultaneously stopped checking my phone and social media for infidelity, which she had been doing all these years. Observing this, I realized that the alarm was probably at the highest level. And then came one of the crucial moments. On one of the weekends when we were sitting with our son in a cafe as a family, I heard the sound of an incoming message on her phone. Well, I managed to grab the phone, and there it was. Kisses, come on dear, I'm crying without you. I'll come soon, wait for me. Putting everything together in my head, the dates of the correspondence and so on, I remembered how she behaved on those days of the correspondence. Primping for half a day, putting on a view, running away without even saying goodbye to me or our son, who then called for his mother half the night because he rarely saw her lately and missed her. I still remember the feeling when I read it. My eyes seemed to fill with blood. Seeing my reaction, she got really scared. I am a kind person by nature, but in a state of passion, I can do bad and terrible things, which she always says. Again she says, "What, I have no one, it's a joke." But she herself has no face. Coming home, she burst into tears, and by this reaction I understood everything. She said that some guy was hitting on her, praising her, comforting her, caressing her, but she was not giving in, and nothing had happened between them. She allegedly just walked with him because I hadn't been paying attention to her lately. I waited all evening for her to confess to what she had done. Being nervous, I took a sedative and fell asleep. Waking up, I saw that she was drunk and going to work. I was completely shocked by what was happening. I tried to stop her, but I didn't use force or yell in front of our son. When she left, I didn't sleep all night, thinking about how and what I was guilty of. It was the beginning of my second depression. When she came home after a day, we talked, and I noticed one detail. That she liked to talk to me, so to speak. I say confess, and in response, I already told you everything, nothing happened between us. But I myself understand everything perfectly well. A week and a half passed, our son got sick with chickenpox. My wife asked me to take sick leave. Aha, I think. It's clear why you don't feel like taking sick leave. Sitting on sick leave for 2 weeks, I found out things about her from acquaintances working in the same center as her. I found out little things like they saw her walking with some guy. On the rare weekends at home, she sat alone and drank in the kitchen. One day, I left my son with my grandmother and went to meet her without warning. Coming out of the center, she said goodbye to her colleagues and, noticing me, was visibly frightened. That evening at her work, she and I talked for a long time. I saw that she felt nothing for me now, but for some reason she was not breaking off the relationship completely. She swore to me that there was nothing between her and that guy, although I read the first correspondence and immediately realized that the guy was a typical Don Juan type, a fucker. But no matter how long a rope is, it will end. And so, after another week, one evening, I noticed again that she was on pins and needles, started primping, getting ready for work. Our son was asleep, and I really got on her case, shouting and interrogating her about where she was going. She changed versions one after another like gloves. I'm going to work. I'm going to a friend's. I'm going to relatives. And then, bam, an SMS sound. I snatch it, and what do I see? Are you coming? I'm already waiting. My eyes fill with blood once more. She's in tears. I dial her number and his number on the phone. After a brief pause, a sweet voice answers. Yes? I won't recount the entire conversation with him, as it's lengthy. In short, he turned pale when he discovered that she had a husband, which is me. According to him, she said that she had been divorced for a month already. From him, I learned that he was a prominent specialist, a doctor. He was afraid to tell me his name, and in principle, it wasn't necessary. I say, taking her. In response, well, I don't need her. I already got everything I wanted 3 times. She then admitted everything after I whipped her with a belt. From talking to her, I realized that she had fallen in love with him. I say, why didn't you divorce me first? In response, because I still love you too. In general, a circus. Why didn't you tell me right away? I ask. She says, I was afraid of losing you, and I was also afraid of your reaction. That's how it is. The most ironic thing is that in all these years, I never once cheated on her, naively believing that only a fool could betray such a bright girl. And I'm definitely not like that. Now we're getting divorced. She's making attempts to suck up to me. What to do next and whether I can resist, I honestly don't know. I would appreciate your advice. Well, that's how it is. Thank you in advance. I'm so sorry to hear about your situation. Infidelity and betrayal can be incredibly painful and confusing experiences. It's understandable that you're feeling a mix of anger, hurt, and uncertainty about the future. In terms of advice, the most important thing is to prioritize your own well-being and that of your son. This is an emotionally charged time, so try to avoid making any rash decisions out of anger or spite. Give yourself space to process your feelings. Seek support from trusted friends, family, or a therapist to help you work through this. When it comes to your wife's attempts at reconciliation, only you can decide if you're open to that, or if too much damage has been done to the relationship. It's valid to feel conflicted. Consider if you believe she is genuinely remorseful, and if you could rebuild trust. Marriage counseling could help navigate this if you want to explore potential reconciliation. However, if you feel the betrayal is unforgivable, that is also completely valid. You are not obligated to accept her apologies or take her back. The divorce process will be difficult, but focus on creating a stable co-parenting relationship for your son's sake. Above all, be kind to yourself during this time. This is not your fault, and her choices are not a reflection on you. Lean on your support system and take things one day at a time as you heal and decide on next steps. Wishing you strength and clarity as you navigate this challenging situation.